Welcome to today's session on adoption, which is the second in a three-part series with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. We're happy to have Adrienne Furness and Bill Coleman and their panel on the call today for you, and they'll be sharing some concepts and strategies around broadband adoption. Thank you so much to our speakers today for making time and sharing your expertise. Thank you to all the participants for being here. And I will let Adrienne give a brief introduction to orient everyone to our presenters. And thank you all for making the time and doing all you do for your communities. Over to you, Adrienne.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you everyone for joining our second open webinar. And as Nancy said, it is on broadband adoption. So I always want to start by thanking Bill Coleman, our community coach for the Illinois Connected Communities program, for organizing this meeting and lining up all of our speakers. And of course, Nancy and Illinois Extension for doing all of the logistics that make this session possible. So let me quickly review what the agenda is going to bring us. And first, you'll hear from Dr. Colin Rhinesmith, who joined the Benton Institute last week as Senior Director of Research and Fellowships. And of course, I'm super delighted about that. Colin, who's formerly an Associate Professor and Director of Community Informatics Lab at the Simmons University Library and Information Science School, that's quite a mouthful, wrote a seminal publication for Benton called Digital Inclusion and Meaningful Broadband Adoption Initiatives. And this was a publication which really defined for the field the 4 activities that are necessary for helping low-income individuals and families adopt broadband in ways that are most appropriate for their personal needs and contexts. And his talk will set up the rest of the agenda, because then we have a series of speakers that are going to touch on some of those very strategies that Colin has identified. We're going to hear from Erin Sherwood and Loren Williams from PCs for People. This is the Cook County operation, which is serving the northern part of Illinois with distribution events. So they are really going to, I think, talk about their efforts to distribute free and low-cost devices and localized, affordable ISP services. Then Benton's own Robbie McBeath, who is our outreach manager, and he's currently writing a guidebook about our Illinois Connected Communities program, is going to review our adoption pathways. This is something that we're in the midst of writing. We always love feedback from people, but it does give communities a checklist of activities that they can undertake to raise adoption in their communities. Then my understanding, Bill, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to break into 2 sets of small group discussions. I think people can choose which one, Bill, or okay. So you can choose which one you're going to be on. You can be in 2 of 4. They will be led by people that you've heard from, but also Adrienne Pickett is going to join us during the small group. She's an Illini Science Fellow with the Illinois Office of Broadband and has been doing some terrific work, not only with Matt Schmidt, but with the Benton Institute in our various efforts to bring better broadband to Illinois. So it's a busy couple of hours. I obviously am thrilled that we're close to 70 participants. And I agree with Nancy, please use the chat and also feel free to contact any of us afterwards if you have further questions. So I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Colin to set the stage. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much, Adrienne. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm very honored and thrilled to be with you all. Let me share my screen so I can show you what we'll be discussing. Okay. All right. And hopefully you can see the big screen here. Everything is in full size and ready to go. All right. So yes, wonderful to be with you all. Again, my name is Colin Rhinesmith, and I'm the new Senior Director of Research and Fellowships at the Benton Institute, as Adrienne mentioned, and I will be talking about the research that I did back in 2015 in a report that was published in 2016, which you can see here. This is the cover of the report titled Digital Inclusion and Meaningful Broadband Adoption Initiatives. So let's get started. So I think it's always helpful to start to talk about definitions so we can understand exactly what, what this report is about. So I think that this definition from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is very helpful in describing particularly what I'll be talking about today, which is digital inclusion. Digital inclusion meaning really referring to the activities that, as you can see here, defined by NDIA as the activities necessary to ensure that all individuals and communities, including the most disadvantaged, have access to and use of information and communication technologies. So it often refers to the what or the how. How do we actually do the work in our communities? And these are the activities often described. But we'll also be talking, because the focus of today is on broadband adoption, I'd like to encourage folks to consider this definition that I put forward in this report, which we'll talk about, which is what describing as meaningful broadband adoption. And you can see by these bolded words here, the most important takeaway here is that it's really about an ecology of support that is provided through a network of different institutions and organizations, informal groups that really are about helping people to adopt broadband and become broadband users, particularly for those who are new to the internet or have not had access to it, or are learning new skills related to digital inclusion and digital equity. So this is really what the report focused on, which I'll go into more detail about. So just briefly, back in 2015, the context and the problem that I was trying to address through this research was, and you can see here that actually, only 67% of Americans had broadband at home. And this was actually, interestingly, for the first time down just slightly from 70% in 2013. This was recognized by the Pew Research Center in their research on broadband adoption in the United States. And we know that lower income individuals and families face significantly higher barriers to adoption because of the cost of broadband. So we can see here only 41% of people with an annual household income of less than $20,000 a year had broadband at home, and this was down from 46% in 2013. It has since gone up. The numbers have increased since 2015, 2016, when this report was released, but still significant challenges remain. The other context for the research was to help inform the Federal Communications Commission as they were working to reform the Lifeline program, the Universal Service Program, for qualifying low-income consumers to provide a subsidy for internet service. And now, since then, we have a lot more, we know a lot more about supports for and subsidies for low-income members of our communities with the work that the Federal Communications has done during the pandemic, the supports that we see, and fortunately through new legislation and the new law that has been passed to support affordable broadband in communities. So this was a lot of the context for the work that I was doing. And really the question that guided all this work was really to try to understand, what are communities doing across the country to promote broadband adoption? And so the main question that I had, one of the main questions was, what are some of the characteristics of these digital inclusion initiatives? And that primarily we're focused on providing low-cost internet and digital literacy training programs. So I was very fortunate to receive support from the Benton Foundation to travel across the country to these locations that you can see here, primarily cities, except for rural Maine and in Machias, Maine, to understand what communities were doing to promote broadband adoption. So I spent about a week in each of these locations, speaking with a number of organizations and individuals who were doing this work. So this is really the main sort of slide that I want to provide. This is something that Adrienne had mentioned earlier, that really, I think what was significant and important about this work at the time was that policymakers and people who were trying to, like the Federal Communications Commission, that were creating low-cost affordable broadband programs for low-income consumers, trying to understand, like, what is going on? What is the field? What does the field look like? Obviously, for people who worked in public libraries and other community centers who were doing this work every day, this was not news to them. But for people not involved in the everyday work of digital inclusion, this became incredibly helpful, particularly for policymakers as they're thinking about developing digital equity interventions from a policy perspective. So this 4-part digital inclusion strategy, I learned, really represented accurately what folks are doing across the country, and still this is quite relevant. Obviously, there have been some changes because of the pandemic, of course, but these 4 areas: providing low-cost broadband options to folks, helping folks to gain digital literacy skills through training and services, but also what was really important to note is the ways in which organizations were making low-cost computers available. And we'll hear from PCs for People today. They were one of the groups that I had an opportunity to meet with and learn from while I was doing my research. And I'll make sure I'm staying on time. Hopefully, Bill, do I have a few more minutes? Okay, great. And the last area that is important, and which is that even once folks have access to low-cost broadband, digital literacy training, and devices that they can use to become internet users, that spaces in communities where people can go to continue their education, continue to also get social support, maybe it's technical support, but also that social and technical support. Public access computing centers, like you find in public libraries, were the sort of, at the time, the 4th leg of the stool. We hear about 3 legs and 4 legs of digital inclusion stools. Today, we hear about programs like digital navigators, which provide the technical support, but also other types of supports that communities need to be successful. So operating public access computing centers is also very important. So what we'll do is I will make these slides available to folks. There's a lot more information in here that I won't have time to get through, but I do want to just move forward a few slides. Let me just go on. Oh, there's PCs for People, which you'll be hearing about. This is had an opportunity to go on a device distribution events, which was really great for PCs for People in Minneapolis, or outside of Minneapolis, actually, which was wonderful. These were some of the computers that were being distributed. So these are the 4 parts of the digital inclusion strategy that I found. That's located in the report. There's a link here that you can access. But I just want to close with a couple of comments here. That again, when we go back to talking about meaningful broadband adoption, so broadband adoption is often talked about as an individual at home, as a consumer of the internet. Meaningful broadband adoption and the work that I would imagine many folks on this call are involved with are really about working together in an ecosystem of support. And this is really what I'm doing now. And so the work that since 2015 and what I'm looking at now is really about these ecosystems of support that are happening everywhere across the country, and increasingly so, that support people in adopting broadband in meaningful ways. So finally, really what I'm saying here is that rather than simply focusing on device distribution or in individuals' ability to gain access, that it's really about rather than focus necessarily on the technology, that we really want to make sure that we focus on the human-to-human interactions in community context that are most helpful to individuals and families. And there's more information about this in the report. And finally, to promote digital equity, I want to argue again that we want to acknowledge that digital inequality is a social, not a technological problem. And to also understand how poverty impacts people's ability to access and use technology, understanding people's everyday experiences with technology can help us to provide insights on how to promote broadband adoption in meaningful ways. And finally, that we always need to listen to those most impacted by the digital divide, because often folks who are most impacted often have the answers to the problems about how to address broadband adoption, promote digital equity in their communities. And we need to remember to include their voices in any initiatives that we work on. So with that, I will conclude. Hopefully that helped to set the stage a little bit for the other presenters today. But it was really wonderful to be with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Good. Thank you, Colin. That was great. Great scene setter for us today, and I appreciate that. Could you post the links to your research in the chat? That would be great to see.
Absolutely.
So, good. Thanks so much. Next up is our speakers, Erin Sherwood and Loren Williams from PCs for People. In full disclosure, both Adrian Furness and I are on the national board of PCs for People. That's how Adrian and I got to know each other and begin our work together in Illinois. And I've been on the board for about 10 years. I think the first year we did 1,000 computers, and I think now they do 1,000 computers a week. So it's an amazing story of the right organization at the right time to meet some of the challenges. Local partners, though, are key to that. So I'm going to turn that over to Erin. She's the managing director of the Cook County Office for PCs for People. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you, the Benton Institute, for inviting us once again to speak. As Bill mentioned, my name is Erin Sherwood, and I am the managing director of the Cook County Office. And joining me is my colleague, Loren Williams. He is responsible as our account executive for ITAD sourcing and helping with recycling. So he'll touch on that as well.
What is ITAD?
The information technology. So all of the computers we're gathering and any technologies we do distribute, Loren works on finding that for us.
Great, thanks.
Yep, and definitely jump in with any questions. As you know, with presenting and my screen full, I won't see the chat. So if you have something, feel free to just pop on. Okay, so who is PCs for People? We were founded in 1998, and we are a national leader in digital inclusion. As a 501(c) nonprofit organization, every project, program, and initiative at PCs for People is centered on getting low-cost computers and affordable broadband internet into the homes of low-income individuals. Through an unwavering commitment to the communities we serve, we have been able to provide nationally 188,000 people with home computers, and we have connected 165,000 people to low-cost internet. In addition to that, we have recycled over 8 million pounds of electronics. We have been functioning in Illinois. We are the Northern Illinois office serving Cook County and Northern Illinois, but we also do have an office in Belleville serving Southern Illinois. In the past year, we have distributed 4,853 computers, 1,300 of those to Cook County specifically. So we are currently running in 8 markets. We just opened up in Atlanta, Georgia as of January 3rd. Loren and I are specific here to Cook County. Our mission is to provide digital inclusion efforts such as, in today's society where it is increasingly hard to access healthcare, education, employment opportunities without access to a computer or the internet. Our model is self-sustainable social enterprise centered on building community value in every part of our program. We do function in 4 different buckets, and we'll cover each one of those quickly today. Sourcing, which is what Loren does. He goes out to the different communities, the different organizations, government entities, and sources the computers and the technologies we will distribute. Distribution is how we impact the local communities that we are working in this case, Cook County. Recycling, there is nothing we won't take with us on the trucks. We do responsibly recycle. And then workforce development as well is our initiative for this year. Distribution is the impact that we are making in the community. We work with community leaders and organizations who are a pillar within the community to help us get the technology into the homes of those who need it most. We serve those with an income under 200% of the federal poverty level. And those are typically people who are receiving any type of income-based government assistance, such as SNAP, housing assistance, Medicaid, or supplemental security income as some examples. What we do is we partner with the organizations. A couple of them are listed here. Anyone who has an eligible audience, we then set up an online registration portal for them to register for. Once a member of the community registers, they choose if they either want the $0 desktop package or the $20 laptop option. We then show up with a truck. We have an entire event spread, an event team, and we distribute the computers typically during a 2-hour event that we'll do. We do them right off the truck. We are COVID safe. We have times. They run very smoothly. For the desktop packages, what people do receive, for example, is they'll have the computer, they'll have the monitor, they'll have cords, keyboards, mice, everything they'll need to go home and set up their computer, along with a simple step sheet that shows them how to run that software, as well as our tech line and customer service line should they have any issues. We partner with organizations that have anybody that have a community need. So we have never turned anyone away. If you have an audience who needs computers and technologies in their home, we are willing to work with you. Loren, I will let you cover ITAD sourcing.
Sure, thanks, Erin. And one of the questions in the chat actually kind of leads into that. Who are our private sector partners? So when it comes to sourcing, we partner with really any organization, and it doesn't have to be in the private sector, any organization that uses computers, which is just about any organization these days. And we make it really easy for organizations to provide us with their computers when they retire them. As any of you know, if you work in an organization, you probably get a replacement computer after 3, 4, or 5 years in most cases. And we find that a computer really has a life of 8 or 9 years. So we want to take that computer from its first life and give it a new life. And we make that really easy for our contributors. Like Erin mentioned, we send our own trucks, our own employees to come in, pick up the equipment. We take it back to our secure warehouse. We remove the hard drives and take them into an even more secure room where we delete all the data. And that's obviously very, very important that any organization doesn't have data leakage. We delete all of the data. We then refurbish the computers. We reload a Microsoft operating system with a brand new license on it. And then we get the computers ready for the distribution process. Anything that we are not able to reuse, something is too old or too broken, it gets responsibly recycled according to our zero landfill policy. So any equipment contributed to us will not end up in a landfill. Okay, so this slide just talks about this year alone, or I should say 2021 alone, we stopped 3.5 million pounds of equipment from going into landfills. That's nationwide. I think that it's really important to note that we use NAID, N-A-I-D, which is the National Association of Information Destruction. We use NAID processes when it comes to deleting data. You probably didn't realize this, but there is an organization that sets standards on how to delete data. And we use that just to make sure that no data gets out there from any equipment that's contributed to us. If by chance we can't delete data on a given computer or hard drive or any data bearing device, we have a shredder or a crusher in each of our locations. So we will physically destroy that drive so the data is completely safe. And yeah, can't do enough of that for IT managers that want to make sure their data is secure. Can you go back to the previous slide for 1 second? I think there was one more bullet point. Okay, we got that, the NAID AAA certified data destruction. And then the benefit to the community, of course, on one hand, it's getting computers to individuals who don't have them. On the other hand, it's just keeping electronics out of landfills. Are there any questions on that process before we go forward?
None
Okay,
in the
so-
chat.
Sorry?
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay. Oh, actually, there was one about private sector. So
Yeah.
a few of the names that you probably recognize that have contributed to us are Morningstar, Hyatt, the American Medical Association, Alliant Credit Union, a lot of and then a lot of smaller organizations maybe you haven't heard of. We've even collected equipment from other nonprofits like Chicago Community Trust, picking up the computers that they were using in their offices when they upgraded. Oh, ITAD stands for Information Technology Asset Disposition.
Thank you, Loren. And then kind of our fourth bucket is workforce development. Again, the Cook County office, we just turned a year old on January 3rd. So this is kind of the initiative we do hope to really ramp up here in 2022. We work in other markets alongside organizations to help enrich lives through employment as well as community opportunities. We are working with Prairie State College, South Shore Works, as well as the American Job Centers, Southwestern American Job Center in Daly College, as well as the American Job Center in Pilsen. Currently just as distribution points, but we do hope to get some workforce development opportunities along the way in 2022. And that is PCs for People. Here is both my information as well as Loren's. If you want to reach out regarding setting up a distribution event, having communities, folks in your communities get computers, or for Loren, if you have computers or recycling you'd like to provide to us, you can reach out to us directly.
Cool. Kathy Brown from Peoria just talked about in the chat, there's a question there. Can you see that, Erin?
Wondering if community creates. Yes, we do. And I believe, Loren, you can talk to this. We have had collections done. I know Alliant Credit Union did one at the airport or nearby the airport a couple months ago. Loren, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, we do some community collections where I think I talked more about our collections from businesses and other organizations. And honestly, that's where we get about 90% of our computers that we redistribute. We do from time to time, when we have the right partners, do community collections where we'll work with another organization. It can be a community center, a library, a chamber of commerce that's willing to help co-sponsor collection of computers and other electronics from the general public. So we are happy to talk to partners about the possibility of doing that.
Good, thanks, Loren.
Mary, you can reach out to me. I work very closely with Kevin, and sometimes we do partner on events together. So if you want to reach out to me, I can pull Kevin in and we can figure out who's best to get you those computers and run that event.
One of the great things about PCs for People is that with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of efforts by schools to get kids computers, but the PCs for People computers are really family computers that can, whereas the school ones are really dedicated to the kids. And so it's great to have those computers, desktops or laptops, right in the dining room or family room or wherever they can find a corner for that, where it can stay there to serve the family. So it's my pleasure to be on the board of PCs for People. It's pretty exciting to see. So thank you so much for the update, and hopefully we can get some computers out in these communities. Thank you. Next up is Robbie McBeath, and he's going to talk about the work that we've been doing with Illinois Connected Communities and our Pathways programs, that we've found a way to organize some of these activities that provide some good logical steps for communities to jump in and not have to think too much about how they're going to plan their activities, but give them a good way forward based on best practices. Welcome, Robbie. But before you do that, I see Peggy has a question with her hand raised. Peggy?
Yep, and I was actually just writing to her in the chat. Peggy, yep, completely understand. And we do have tech support ongoing as well as customer service support from the time they get the computer. So anybody who has a challenge, whether it's getting something to plug in or work correctly, they call in, they troubleshoot with our tech. And in most instances, if it's an issue that can't be resolved by the user, we just swap it out with a brand new one or a brand new refurbished computer.
Erin, one thing you didn't talk about, and you can talk about in the small group, but do you want to talk a little bit about your internet service?
Sure, we do provide, like some commercial providers, our own wireless internet service. It is $15 a month. And what our goal is with that is to serve communities that commercial providers are not servicing. So because we run a little bit differently, there's no contract, there's no monthly fee. It's kind of a pay as you go and use the service. We are in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as well as Kansas City. We are launching some programs in Atlanta, and we are quite broad in Ohio in the Cleveland area servicing. We service small areas. It's a 3-mile radius, but it is for communities who have a very high demand, who aren't able to, get the service by a, Xfinity Wireless or something of that nature. Okay. And then, of course, with all of our events, we do promote the Affordable Connectivity Program as well with our hotspots.
Good, thanks. Thank you so much. Okay, good. Robbie, you're up. Thank you. It's great to work with Robbie as a colleague in the ICC program, and he's doing a great job on these pathways documents. Welcome, Robbie.
Thank you, Bill. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to share my screen in just a second. So let me see. Okay, can people see the PowerPoint? I know I've been doing this for a while now. Okay, you never know. Always good to ask. Okay, so
Bobby, hold on. You can also see your preview on the left, so I think you want to get rid of that.
Oh, let's see here. View, or let's see. Full screen. Why am I not seeing it? Isn't there a presenter view?
Down in
Light shows. Make this work. There you go.
There we
That
go.
works. Okay. I don't know. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Bill. I'm just here to talk a little bit about what we're calling the pathways to digital equity. So for those that are maybe unfamiliar, Bill and I help run the Illinois Connected Communities program, working with local communities, combined with where I'm working, the Benton Institute, a philanthropic organization with the Illinois State Office of Broadband, to help communities kind of plan and prepare different broadband projects and everything. And so before I go into the pathways, I just wanted to provide this as a framework for what we're talking about. So this, we have previously done a webinar like this on access, and this one was about adoption. And we have one ultimately coming up about use. And both the Illinois Office of Broadband and the Benton Institute, we like to think of these as all 3 legs of the stool of digital equity, getting at to what Colin had talked about in his presentation, which is a more holistic view of what we mean about getting more technologies into people's hands, getting internet access, but also the skills and the support to use those technologies, and really looking at what are the different barriers that are keeping people from participating in this online world. So we're going to be looking at that middle column here on adoption, which is really all about, are people subscribing to and using broadband? And if so, why not? And so we'll get into that a little bit more. But before that, I wanted to share what Bill and I have been working on along with our fellows, which is a series of pathways. And so I'm going to put a PDF into the chat. Give me just one second. That if people want to kind of scroll through, they can. It's a work in progress. It's a living document. It is, ready for people to kind of browse through, but we're going to be modifying it in the weeks and months ahead as we work with our Illinois Connected Communities Program round 2. That'll ultimately kind of be led to a final guidebook for different communities to kind of have have a playbook about, what they can actually do towards moving towards digital equity in a variety of different ways. So I just wanted to put that kind of out there, that it's a work in progress, and because of that, we're looking for feedback that people might have. So we're in the pathways document. You're going to see an access, adoption, and use kind of all separate, and they all follow this basic layout, which I'm not going to spend too much time on today, since this is an adoption oriented program. But the idea is that each pathway has what we're going to be calling pathway victories, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which is what can local communities ultimately do to increase adoption numbers that they'll see. And so the general pathway for each that we're going through, establishing a steering committee, we're noticing vitally important for local communities. No matter what you're wanting to do, working in a group is more likely going to help you get there. Similarly, gathering information is next. You have to know what's going on in your community, who is subscribing to broadband, who is not subscribing to broadband. Then working on a strategy, that's really where Bill's expertise, I think, comes in, is helping these communities and guiding them through the process, implementing the plan and then identifying successes. Obviously a broad overview for these things, but all important, and we'll kind of dig into adoption a little bit more deeper now. So I wanted to point out barriers to broadband adoption. We identify 5. This is from the National Telecommunications Information Administration, their Broadband USA document. And so when thinking about adoption barriers in your community, it's not just kind of one thing. There are multiple things. And I think it's really important for organizations and policymakers to really be aware of the adoption issue as being multifaceted. And so access and availability, is kind of the most obvious one. And so we start with that, which is if people don't have it, or it's not at the adequate level that they need it, that's obviously going to be a barrier to adoption. And so while it's also a leg of the stool, it's also just kind of needs to be set as a barrier. If it's not available in your community, you're going to have a low adoption numbers ultimately. But the main emphasis that Benton and Colin's research has concluded, and a point that we really try to emphasize, particularly to federal policymakers, is that cost is really the main barrier to broadband adoption. Colin's research, I think, indicates like $10 a month roughly for a lot of people is sort of the limit, the threshold that they can devote when they start having to make decisions around food, or other kind of bills and costs associated. And so when you're thinking about how can we increase broadband adoption in my community or this area, cost is probably one of the main barriers that you should be looking at looking at solutions to overcome. Meaning, okay, where are people with lower incomes in our community? What is their broadband situation like, and how can we kind of ultimately put resources into that area? Other barriers, perception, and I think of this around things like safety or privacy issues. So there's a lot of families ultimately that might determine, I can afford broadband, it's in my area, but I have, hesitancy about what the effects will be on my family, whether or not it's safe. Same with elderly populations, which, across different demographics is kind of like has some of the lowest adoption numbers. There's certainly a safety component. And similar to that, we talk about relevancy. So just this idea that, I've gotten along just fine without broadband and internet technologies. I don't necessarily need these. They're not going to add to my life in a substantial way. So those, might be overlooked by people who, I don't want to call them, technology evangelists or something like that, but for people that naturally see internet or broadband as a good, might not be meeting people where they are around concerns over, is it safe? How is my privacy going to be protected? Is it actually a benefit to my life? So that can be something to think about in your adoption strategies. Is, are we communicating the benefits in a way that our target population can understand and kind of really meets the concerns and the barriers that they have? And then lastly, skills. I think there's the common thing of we're afraid of things that we don't understand, or nobody has taught me, or I come from a traditionally ignored, under-resourced community. And so digital skills were not something that have been introduced into my life. Whatever the reasons are, that is certainly a limitation to broadband adoption. We had this example in our Connect Illinois Round 1 program with the Village of Flanagan. We had one participant who had a lot of elderly friends who didn't really understand the value of cutting the cord and sort of the cost benefit analysis of, say, oh, if I had adequate internet access, I can get the shows and these sorts of things that I would want to access, and I wouldn't have to pay a large cable bill. You can ultimately save some money. So those are almost kind of like consumer skills. Obviously, you have the technical skills of needing to be able to cut the cord and what that means, but also just kind of the savviness and the understanding of the benefits that can come your way. So that's another area, which is why libraries, I think, play such a particular role, and schools as well, in the adoption portion of digital equity work, because really it is about kind of teaching people new skills and things going into the future. Okay, so obviously this is a lot of information, but this is just kind of a brief look at kind of a layout of different what we are calling pathway victories, which is when we're working with Illinois connected communities, what are the actual things that steering teams produce or work towards to help reduce adoption gaps in their communities. And so you'll see things like formed an adoption team and subcommittee, kind of step one, as I alluded to earlier, but you'll also see things in here like investigate and promoted alternative internet solutions for apartment buildings and MDUs, or multiple dwelling units. So that can be a place that people might not think about in your community, where you can make a really, really strong impact on reducing the digital divide just by, for example, working with large lease agreements for public housing in your community. So a lot of times landlords and other housing groups will buy internet subscription packages in bulk, or have one kind of like monopoly provider in their area. So if you can work with those groups ultimately to negotiate those contracts, you can make a huge headway into the adoption game. So I'm just going to leave this up for a little bit for people to kind of take a look at. These are all things that communities have achieved just in the few months ultimately of our Connect Illinois, or Illinois Connected Communities program. And so I just want to pause, kind of see if there's any questions or any thoughts that people have. Take a look at the chat as people kind of.
Robbie, would you want to talk more about the relevancy and things communities might do to increase the relevancy for folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And ultimately, I think it kind of bleeds into the use leg of the stool, which is sometimes confusing. And so don't worry if those sort of distinctions don't really make sense. But when we talk about use, we often talk about kind of more organizational, system-wide benefits of having people connected to a broadband network. John Sallet for the Benton Institute always talks about how you have positive networks effect with something like broadband, where the more people that are connected to high speed, adequate capacities in an area, everyone kind of benefits from those things. And so an example of that would be things like telehealth, like robust telehealth systems in, say, like a rural area. If you have more people connected to adequate broadband speeds, telehealth becomes often an affordable, achievable option for many people that would otherwise have difficulties accessing healthcare. So to come to somebody and say, if they're thinking broadband is just about Facebook, I think the Institute for Self-Reliance has an article saying like broadband is more than Facebook, because people often, if it's a relevancy question, only have a few images in mind of what the internet or broadband might mean. But if you come to them to say, look, this opens up an opportunity for better telehealth care, for example, instantly it becomes relevant for people that might, previously have not associated broadband to that category.
Yeah. Robbie?
Yeah.
And I would just say, if you're thinking about individuals, you might, well, what are they interested in? Mm-hmm. And so if you're talking to women who make quilts, so you could say, look at the 10,000 patterns you can find here on, just if you're sitting with someone, you can really find out exactly what they're interested in. They're fishing or job search or any number of things. And I think you're cutting the cable piece is another big relevancy thing. So.
And yeah, and we often point to a lot of community leaders working in broadband expansion or infrastructure are in the economic development sphere. So how do we, position our community to take advantage of jobs for tomorrow, the economy of tomorrow? And very quickly, it becomes kind of obvious, I think, that no matter what, broadband is going to be an essential engine for economic growth. And so that relevancy, that we talk about this with the pandemic, relevancy used to be a much higher barrier, particularly in policymaking for advocating, people like Benton that have been advocating for broadband for a very, very long time. It's the pandemic did wonders, tragically, unfortunately, but in terms of remote education and these sorts of things, which had been previously a thing that certain policymakers have been advocating, now became like a huge essential thing, strictly if you want to safely have an education. So fortunately, relevancy is becoming less of a barrier, but I think it's really about like meeting people where they are and asking, how do you anticipate broadband influencing your life? And that's not necessarily kind of a top-down approach, whatever works, bottom up, top down, but overcoming that barrier, I think, is key. Yeah. And again, I think libraries are key there. In my experience working in tech labs and libraries, I think people often come in with like one need ultimately that they need help with in a literacy component, and then are sort of like opened up to, oh, I didn't realize, all of these different things become available, that things that, users or digital savvy people have been experiencing their whole life. It's,
good.
Quite a story.
Robbie.
Yeah.
You have 5 minutes now to cover the affordable piece.
Oh, am I doing that? Or I thought that was I was doing
Or
that.
is that your small group?
That's I can go into it real fast,
Nope.
but I would be spoiling my small group. So I'll just close with some of these resources if I got 5 minutes, and I'll end a little early. So each pathway we're trying to have, these are all hyperlinks. I apologize if it's hard to see. I couldn't figure out how to get it out of the green across the board on the PowerPoint. So I hope everyone can see these things okay. But we're trying to put together a list of helpful resources that are included in these pathways that we're learning from through our Illinois Connected Communities, but also kind of feedback from other people. So PCs for People Illinois is on here, as you heard from. But the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, I think that the adoption leg of the stool is really a strong one for them. So they have a digital inclusion startup manual that's here. They have a whole database of free and low cost internet plans. They have a digital navigator model that they are kind of working on and advocating, which is all about kind of a training the trainer system in libraries to maybe get, for example, like a high school class into a library to then serve as tutors and volunteers to everybody else that might be using the library. Learning at Home While Underconnected is a New America publication all about assisting with remote learning challenges. So, there's ultimately infinite resources. We're trying to just narrow it down to things that are most beneficial for people and communities across Illinois that are looking. And I just kind of want to close on broadband adoption is going to be a moving, ongoing gap that you're trying to reduce, because you can always kind of use technology differently and it's always going to be dynamic. So I just encourage people on this call in different communities to be thinking, okay, what can we actually accomplish? In the Illinois Connected Communities program, we talk about small wins, we talk about large wins. And so there are just, there are so many small things that communities can do that they might not have thought before that I really think are important, in addition to what larger resources can we deploy from our communities to start tackling some of the major challenges that we might have. So, and then in my small group, I'll be talking about just one of the federal responses around an internet subsidy discount program. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Robbie. Very good. And I encourage you to take a look at that document, and we've got sections on adoption, which is pretty well, or access and adoption, which are pretty well done. And then we're growing that use section and big plans for that in the future. So encourage you to take a look at that and all the links and so on, tools that are in there. Thanks so much. Our next chance now is to break into some small groups, and we're going to open up the breakout rooms, and people will be able to assign themselves to a room. There's 4 topics that you have a chance to explore. We'll be in these rooms for 15 minutes. So you'll be able to ask questions and have a small group discussion with your peers who are in that. We'll have a room leader in each one. And then after 15 minutes, we'll come back and then jump right into a second choice. And so encourage you to be ready with your 2 choices here. The 4 groups are distributing free and low-cost devices, which is a PCs for People group. Loren is going to lead that one, and he'll talk about how to think about events and distribution of PCs in your community. We're going to talk about spurring the use of the FCC Affordable Connectivity Program, and Robbie's going to talk about that. That's a program now, a permanent program that provides up to $30 per month per household for broadband connectivity. And so that's a great opportunity to begin to address costs of folks. Number 3 is around digital navigators, and the idea of having people in your community that can help families figure out what's best for them in terms of access and adoption. And then number 4 is this localized affordable ISP service. And I've seen some conversation in the chat about those things. And so there's great opportunity for folks to hear about those things. And so we'll just ask people now. Nancy has provided those names of those in the chat. And then, so if you just be able to click on the breakout room tab on the bottom of your screen, and those will be open, and you can pick those if you need help. Nancy will be able to place you in a room of your choice, but hopefully people will be able to click on that box and find their rooms. So let's do that now, and we'll set a timer for 15 minutes and be back around 12:40 for our second group. Thanks, everyone.
And all participants have been given the ability to unmute themselves so that when they go into their breakout rooms, they will unmute and be able to have the discussions with those different respective hosts in those rooms. So I see that probably half the group, maybe almost half the group, has assigned themselves. And so if you are having trouble, what you're going to do is you're going to look at this Zoom screen, and you're going to go down to the bottom right hand corner, and it should say breakout rooms. If you push on that button, you will see the 4 choices. Now, if you don't see where you can select a breakout room, just put in the chat which of those topics you're interested in or which room number you're interested in going into. And I will put you in that room. Again, I've put the 4 breakout room topics in the chat, room number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you're having trouble assigning yourself to a room, you can just say 1, 2, 3, or 4, and I will put you in that room. And I'm going to pause the recording, and then we'll kick that off again when we come back.